Okay, so welcome to this second video here. Where I left you in the last video was at the whiteboard, and we went through how to construct a spreadsheet, sort of construct a model for at the whiteboard for figuring out NPV, looking at future cash flows, basically looking at an income statement and then a cash flow statement, and getting those free cash flows, projecting them into the future years, and then pulling that back to present value. So that's conceptually what we were talking about doing at a discount rate. So now I'm gonna show you, and I left you with the quiz. What was the net present value, and was it a deal worth doing or not? And so here are those numbers. We're going to do it in a spreadsheet so I can show you how to set it up and actually how to figure out those numbers. And I'll include this spreadsheet as a template for you as a download to this video, to this lesson, so that you can have that to look at too, and then put in your own numbers and things. But basically, it's just like what we had on the board, but now we're going to do it in the spreadsheet, right? So we have the discount rate was 22%. That's what we talked about. And the net income went from 1,000 to 1,500 to 2,000, 2,500 to 3,500, right? And then we're going to have a terminal value based on that year 5, that 3,500 going out into the future ad infinitum. So with that in mind, here is the spreadsheet. I put a couple of extra tabs here. We talked about the startup cost being 5,000. So basically, here I have a little spreadsheet for the costs, and that goes through the first year, right? Months 1 through 12, basically, and then the total. So you could fill in these numbers, whatever line items you needed, and come up with this, your total number for the costs. And then that number gets pulled over to this summary sheet. You see, these are the different sheets here that'll, the different tabs and for the sheets. So the startup costs 5,000. So if you look here, it goes to that startups page, and it's pulling cell Q12. So if you don't know how to do this, you just set up the different sub sheets or whatever tabs here, different sheets, and then you hit equals on this cell, and then go to that other sheet and pick the one you want. So Q12 is, surprise, surprise, this guy right here, right, where we're summing it up, Q12. And so that's how we get this number here. And this is a great way to do it, because then you have a whole sheet that has all the itemized costs or whatever it is, and then you can show everybody exactly those numbers, so everything's transparent as you go through. And then you can build up consensus and agreement amongst your partners or investors or customer, whoever it is that you're working on making a financial decision with, and doing a net present value calculation. So now we have the startup costs. Same thing I did for the expenses and the revenues here, right? The revenues are these numbers here, and the expenses are these numbers here. And when you net those out, and when you take one minus the other there, you get these net numbers, which are the numbers that we talked about on the whiteboard, right? So, and I can show you those here. Here's the expenses, right? Goes out. And here's the different. So the first year I pull it out month by month, and then there it is in the total, right? Here's the total down here. And so there's the first year's total of all these guys. And then I just increase those numbers, and you can do the same kind of thing and go out 5 years. And these numbers are getting pulled over into the expenses line item on the summary sheet. And here's the revenue items, and same thing, and these are just being pulled year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Onto the line items here for revenues and then expenses. And then net income is the revenues minus expenses, right? So there we are. And we're saying that's essentially free cash flow. We're not going through. We could then actually add, back, whatever the accrual numbers were that were in revenues expensive, like accounts receivable and accounts payable and things. But to keep this simple and just sketch it out, I'm just doing it this way, right? And we have here the discount rate of 22%. So with those numbers in mind, now we look at, I'm going to show you 2 different ways to calculate present value, right? And present value is basically the present value of this income stream. And then the net present value is that present value minus the costs. And so if that number is a positive number, well, then we're set. It's a good deal. If it's a negative number, then no, it's not worth doing. And then, a function of these discount rates too, these numbers will be higher and lower. And I can show you some of how this is sensitive to the discount rates too. So let's look at this now. The way that I calculated this first present value number is basically a sum of these numbers here. So let's go through the terminal value. Let's pick that first, right? The terminal value is basically you capitalize this number at some interest rate. This last year's number at some interest rate. And in this case, I picked 15%. You can pick 15, 20, 10%, depending on how risky you think these things are into the foreseeable future, and maybe what everybody agrees to is a good rate too, right? So in this case, I took this number, right, H11 here, this 3,500, and divided it by 0.15. Now, when you divide by a decimal, that is like multiplying by a number, right? So if you divide by 0.1, that's the same as multiplying by 10, just to give you an idea, right? So if you know your fractions and all. So capitalizing is just dividing by that interest rate, and that gives you the number in the future. And there's a whole bunch of math to prove out that actually works, and I'll leave that up to you to go look in a financial book if you want and things. But just take it on faith that that's a given formula, right? So now what we do is we take these numbers and we have to discount them back to year one, to year zero for each of these years, right? So the formula for doing that is this. It's one, and I showed you on the board, one, the cash flow, right, divided by 1 plus the interest rate, the discount rate, which is this guy here, C6, right? That's that number there, C6. And then to the exponent of what year it is. And so in this case, the year is D7, right? And so each year, we're going to do that. We're going to say, okay, it's going to be this cash, in year two, it's going to be this cash flow times the interest rate to the, times divided by 1 over the interest rate to the second power, right? So that's this E, that's that guy there, right? E7. And when you're doing exponents, it's that little caret symbol, which is the shift symbol, shift 6 basically. It's the symbol above the 6 on your keyboard, right? And that is in Excel what then raises whatever this number is to that power. So I've done it as a formula with a couple of things. These dollar signs make sure that when you take this first cell and do this, and then as you drag it across and copy it to these guys, it will copy across these numbers as the exponent, but it'll keep this number fixed. That's what those dollar signs do, right? So it keeps each one of these is looking back at C6, right? See how it does that, but it's changing to whatever that root number is here, right? And double clicking on it gives you the formula, lets you show all the cells that are being called. Excel is just so darn cool. So there is those numbers all the way out, and then here is this number here. Now we have to remember that we're doing it in year 5, right? So that number is this number taken back 5 years to there at 22%. And you can see how these numbers get discounted quite a bit as you go out further in years. And this is a pretty high discount rate too, right? So that's considered, I would consider that a conservative rate that has a lot of risk embedded in it. When you think the risk-free rate, if you think about treasury bills as being the risk-free rate, they're probably at about maybe 2% or 3% or something like that. So that gives a lot of room in there for other types of risks that you might encounter in trying to predict these cash flows into the future. So there's those numbers. We add them all up here, right? This is the sum of those guys, and we come up with 13,986, 14 grand, right? Just round numbers, and I would probably round those numbers, but when you do the math, it comes out to an accurate number. But so say 14 grand there, right? So now here is the second way of doing it. So that's that way of doing it. Here's the second way of doing it with net present value, right? Doing the net present value formula. Now this is the NPV formula in Excel. But there's really no net here. It's just basically a present value formula. So what I did was I took this here is C6, right? That's the interest rate. That's where you put that. And then you put the stream of numbers that you want to calculate. And that's this stream here. And I left this one off, this terminal value one, because if I did that in the Excel formula, it would, and if I took that up to H12, say, right, or I11, right, then that would it would discount it as a year 6, so it would discount it even more. So to get it to be a year 5 discount rate, I put in the NPV formula just this stream, and then I added this one, I12, right, I12, separately, so that it knows that is actually with the 5, 5 years as the discounting period. And when you add those up again, sure enough, same number, right? So these two numbers should be the same, both ways of calculating it, and they are. So that is a good way to cross-check and validate your work. Do it both ways, and then you can see, okay, yes, I got the right number. I hesitate to, when you have two different ways, why not do it both ways and make sure you converge on the same number, so you're double checking your work and you don't know you did. You can be more certain that you didn't make a mistake. So there they are. They both work, this formula, or just plugging it into the NPV. Very convenient way of doing it. So then we know the startup costs are $5,000. So this number here is basically just this minus that, right? And it is 86. So that's almost $9,000, right? So $9,000 in the plus. That's a deal worth doing, right? And so you pull the green light. Now let's just take a look quickly at how sensitive these are to interest rates. Now the way I've sent this up as a formula, say if somebody said, I think that 22% is not enough risk. I think it should be 25%. You could say, okay, well, let's see if it still works. And you just change this number, .25, right? Boom. And there it is, 25%, because I set it up as a percentage. And now it's gone down to 76 from almost $9,000, so it has reduced, but it is still positive. So it's a good deal. Or say, somebody thought, well, our hurdle rate, say if you are working in a company and you're going to be looking at different projects and the CFO says the hurdle rate, we're not going to do any projects that don't return at least 15%. So that's the hurdle rate. In big companies, they'll give you that type of rate, and then you can use that as your discount rate because it's all been figured out for you. So let's say it was 15%. Okay, so then you do 15. And there it is, voila. Well, that's even a bigger, these numbers get bigger and that gets bigger, right? The net present value. So as the interest rate goes down, these guys get discounted less into the future. And so the present value goes up, right? The higher the interest rate, these get discounted more in the future, and so these numbers go down, and so the net present value is going to go down because the startup costs in year 0, they're basically fixed, right? They're not sensitive to the interest rate. So let's go back to the 0.22, just because 22%, that's what we had, and here we can see, yes, this is a good deal to do. So I hope these are the numbers you got and you set it up in a similar fashion. And if not, I hope this was illuminating and gave you a great tool for how to set up these in the future. You can set up just about any problem with a income producing asset using this simple model with just expenses, revenues, whatever the costs are, pulling those numbers over here into a summary sheet and figuring out the calculation. Really simple in Excel, in a spreadsheet formula. In a spreadsheet, these things are just really, really easy to set up and do. And then you also have saved all of your assumptions, all your calculations, like your assumptions about expenses and revenues and your assumptions about discount rates. Everything is here. So if anybody says later on, well, where'd you come up with, these as the expenses? You don't have to say, oh, gee, I forget. 6 months, a year later, you can go and say, yep, this is why we thought this was a good deal. Say if you get out into year 3 and things have changed dramatically from what you projected, you can pull back to the projections and say, well, this is why we all agreed this was a good deal. That way you have a way to cover the decision after everybody forgets why it was rational. You still have the information to go back and say, look, we all agreed on this, that, and the other thing. And you can use this as a negotiating tool up front to gain consensus within the company, gain agreement, gain buy-in, so everybody is bought into the project, because everybody gets transparently to see all the numbers and then to say whether, say their piece if they have any issues with discount rate, or, if they think these are growing too fast or too slow, or the expenses are growing too fast or too slow. Like here, the expenses stay the same for 3 years. They may say that's not really reasonable. These expenses should increase in the years, just for inflation or whatever else. And you could say fair enough and start changing those numbers until you get something that everybody agrees to. So I hope you found this valuable and interesting, and I'll catch you in the next session, in the next section.